Hi, everybody. My name's Steve. I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April 18th of 2014. Not my first sobriety date. I have a sponsor, Bill S. He's currently in Aruba vacationing. I sponsor men who sponsor men, and I'm active in my home group and in this fellowship. Glenn, thanks for having me. Appreciate the invite. Carol for the referral. I'm going to kind of tell you what it was like and how I drank and kind of take you through what my experience has been through Alcoholics Anonymous and these 12 steps. Took me a long time to really understand what was wrong with me. I drank for effect. I was always looking for something external to fix how I felt inside. I mean, I needed a drink in kindergarten kind of stuff. I was unbelievably insecure and, just struggled feeling like I was a part of. So I was always feeling less than, and I got into athletics and things like that because that was the first time I'd ever gotten an experience where I was feeling better than, or I got, praise and things like that for, athletic accomplishments. So I played hockey and for 20 years and played some golf professionally until a back injury ended my career. Now, I'm going to kind of fast forward to college and the end of my drinking. And I was failing out of college at Penn State University. And I was just, I grew up under the burden of potential. I don't know if anybody had that problem. It's like, oh, if I could just get my act together, then I would be okay. And I started seeing, friends that I had graduated high school with, just kind of checking those life boxes, kind of graduating easily, having successful relationships, getting jobs and keeping jobs, and, eventually graduating college and going off getting married and just, crushing it. Right. And I'm literally struggling waking up before noon to get to these classes. And I had this horrible depressive period. And I'm going to, keep my comments to alcohol as much as possible. I did have an experience that literally where God came into my life that I do relate to substances other than alcohol, but it's only to discuss the power of what God did for me later on in my story. So I had this horrible depressive period because of all the things I was putting in my system and drinking every day and not being able to stop. And I knew coming back to college this particular semester, I was on academic probation. And if I didn't get my act together, Penn State University was going to invite me to leave and never come back. And that was one of those things that was like way underneath my belief systems or values that I had to finish college. And that scared the hell out of me. And even with that knowledge that was happening, I came back to school, and the roommate I had the previous semester left because of my drinking, and they had the nerve to give me an Australian exchange student as a roommate. So I had to, of course, show him what America was all about. And off I was again down that path of not being able to drink and having no idea that was the problem. Guys, I didn't know what alcoholism really was other than like a brown paper bag drunk in the Bowery kind of thing. And I had it in my family. I knew, but I had no idea what it looked like or what it was. My parents weren't real drinkers. My grandfather on my dad's side died of alcoholism. And he was a closet drinker. So after he died, they found all these bottles all over the place. And they had no idea that this infiltrated the family. It was just one of those things you swept under the rug. So I start going down to this CAP center because I know I need a medical withdrawal. I got to get out of school so I can kind of regroup and get back. And I go down to this counselor at the CAP center, Penn State. And I'll never forget it because he kept hearing me talk about my drinking. If I could just stop this, if I could just stop partying, then I could go on and do all these other things because I have a lot of great stuff going for me. And, he kind of keeps directing my attention back to my drinking. And he's like, Steve, I want to kind of talk about this drinking and dependency. And he started to explain to me what abuse and dependency looked like. He goes, I want to try an experiment with you. I want you to, we're going to meet again next week, and I want you to go home, and I want us to come up with an idea of how many days you can drink and do what you do until we meet again, and we're going to try to stick to it. And I was like, okay. And I had to think for a second because we had a big game against Michigan that weekend, and I was like, all right, that's going to be a big weekend. So I got to kind of, so I was like, all right, how about like, I don't know, 3 or 4? And he's like, okay, fine. You know, I thought he was going to be like trying to cut it back, but I go home with the absolute intent that I was going to be able to stick to 3 or 4 times. And something would happen during the course of the day where I would change my mind. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. And little by little, I start to drink and use every single day. And I go back there kind of with my head down and slumped over. I was like, man, I thought I was just, an undisciplined, horrible person that was just lazy and immoral and all that stuff that we hear. And I go back in there, and it was the first time I'd ever realized that I had a problem with alcohol, you know, this dependence thing. So long story short, he suggests that I go to inpatient. So I take credit for this because I think that's what I was trying to do, right? And I go to this place called the Karen Foundation. I do my 30 days, and I go through these detox things, and I'm watching people withdraw from some seriously hard drugs, and I'm having blood pressure fluctuations, right? I'm 23 years old at the time. This is 1996. Now, I kind of go into these group sessions, and we start talking about our childhoods, our triggers, and all this other stuff. And I learn a lot what booze and drugs do to the system and all the crazy stuff that happens. But I was never told what I actually suffered from, right? So I do my 28 days, and some guy picks me up that's my age now and takes me to a meeting, and everybody's like older, and they're all just, I don't know if you have a lot of people here that went to AA meetings, but in the area I went to back in the 90s, there was a lot of open discussion meetings and speaker meetings and things like that, and never anything around the big book, solution-based stuff. So we kind of go and share our feelings and go to the diner afterward, and we do the 90 and 90 and watch out for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and all that stuff. And I kind of lucked out because I fell in love with the fellowship. I was the first time I ever felt like I belonged anywhere, and nobody was kicking me out or, they were all trying to be helpful, and it was great. So I kind of would go in and I'd shoot my hand up and I'd share my feelings, and, we just share, and we go to the diner, and I got a coffee commitment, made the hell out of the coffee. And then something started to happen. I started getting sicker and sicker inside the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, this absolute blind rage, right? And I remember meeting this guy who had about 5 years sobriety, and I liked the way that he shared because it was very intellectual, and I wanted to understand things and things like that. And my first experience with the big book was basically to go to where the directions are, on inventory, and basically follow that and write out my life story and meet with them. They told me I worked the first 3 steps getting here, which I had no idea what they were. I didn't really look them up. I'd see them on the shade on the wall. And then I went and I shared my life story, and I kind of had a confessional relief kind of thing like that. And I made some tornado amends. And then I kind of, went off into self-reliance, try to check those life's boxes. Hey, thanks for getting the booze and the drugs off me, guys. I'll take it from here. And what I was able to do in my period of sobriety was I was in this grace that allowed me to go back and finish college and graduate. And then I moved to South Florida to kind of go nip at the heels of Tiger Woods and try to play professional golf. Now, I moved down to South Florida. I don't want to be the new guy again. I've kind of tried AA, didn't really get a lot out of it, and I kind of go on for a period like this of about 12 years, right? And life did get better because I wasn't having the consequences from my drinking and things like that. 2 years into my playing, I had gotten some guys to put some money together for me, and they sponsored me to go out and play for a couple of years on this thing called the South Florida Tour. And 2 years in, I herniate my disc and get a back injury that literally debilitates me and ultimately ends my golfing career. So I had to go through the physical therapy and all that other stuff. And you know what doctors in South Florida in the late 90s, early 2000s give you when you hurt your back. I was never a pill guy. Okay. Now, I had no idea what this awakened in me because I took it as it was prescribed, and I would I happened to meet a really famous, successful golf instructor that I just happened to really get along well with and really understand his teaching philosophy. And I was the guy he would send out on the PGA Tour and LPGA Tour to work with these players, that most of which I came up with, right? Now they're out there making millions of dollars. So I'm sitting there going, well, this ain't right, because used to be able to beat some of these guys. And now I'm sitting here trying to help them go out and make $1 million for the week. So I was, getting a little bit bitter, but I had arrived. You know what I mean? I've gotten that drugs and alcohol off of me. I'm okay now. Now look at me. I'm finally starting to ring those bells. And when I got to the absolute pinnacle of the most money I had, I'm traveling around the world, making the most money I'd ever had, getting the praise, the accolades, all that stuff. I was absolutely emotionally and spiritually bankrupt. Right. And now at this time, I'm working part-time in the summertime up in the Hamptons and down in Palm Beach in the wintertime. And I'm living this crazy life, none of which I can take credit for, as I go through this process. And all of a sudden that, the shine wears off. Right. And I remember being at a buddy of mine's house, not a cloud on the horizon, nothing bad was happening. In fact, everything was absolutely great. And suddenly the thought crosses my mind. Now I'm 12 years dry at this point. Okay. Thinking I've done AA, not knowing what I've got going on inside me. Right. I don't know. I have a phenomenon of craving and a mental obsession. That literally my self-reliance brought me back to that strange mental blank spot. And suddenly the thought crosses my mind. And I'm at a friend's house. He has a bar right behind me, which I'd stayed with for years. And I pick up a drink and I drink it. And the worst thing in the world happened. Nothing. I'm sitting there going, my head didn't spin around. I didn't have oh my God, maybe. And then the thought comes to my head, well, maybe I was just going through a bad patch. Right. And I'm not going to lie, guys, for the next 3 years, I got 3 more years out of alcohol. Right. I started working again. I was keeping it to the weekends. I was figuring, I was like, well, I'm going to kind of go out cautiously on this ledge. And if it gets bad again, maybe I'll go back to AA and share with them what I've learned. Right. So I started drinking to help improve my sobriety down the road. It's just crazy. This stuff doesn't even make sense. So, the mistake that I made in that brilliant reasoning I had was I thought that I could just come back. And 3 years I hit the wall. Now, I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I've got a scorching bad back pill problem, and I'm drinking round the clock, and I can't stop drinking. Okay. And I'm absolutely miserable. I'm now a drinking member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm getting 30 days, 60 days, 90 days drink. Everything that I learned in rehab, everything I knew that I wasn't quite being too smart about with this drinking, I was powerless to stop. Now, mind you guys, I've now been in and around Alcoholics Anonymous for between 15 to 18 years, and I don't know what I suffer from. I'm thinking just don't drink and go to meetings, get that stuff separated from me, then I'll be okay. So I'm having a real problem with this. I'm just going, why was I able to get 12 years and not able to do this? And I'm going to meetings and people are telling me to up my meeting count. And I'm just like, I get there and I'm going, please let me hear something today. It's going to keep me from stopping at the liquor store on the way home, which I never did. I didn't know there were different types of meetings and things like that. And, I would just kind of, talk to people and show up at a meeting and we just fellowship, which was awesome. And it's a part of our treatment and we need to do that, but it doesn't treat what I suffer from. Right. So I'm going to these meetings and, drinking. And I end up going into this meeting and there's a guy in there that was sharing at this meeting. And I had moved back to New Jersey and I'd gotten a job in Western New Jersey that I absolutely hated. I'm no longer traveling and doing that stuff. And now I'm a golf pro running tournaments and folding sweaters and all this other stuff. And I feel like I'm in a prison. And, I go into this meeting and this guy's sharing about this blue book and how he hung out with these old timers that just used to tell him when he was back in the mid 90s, when he was my age, to just get in the car. And they'd get in the car and they'd go to these meetings and they'd kind of read this book to him and they'd take him through this process. And I was like, what the hell is he talking about? Right. And he happened to lock eyes with me during this one particular share, and he says, "You have absolutely no idea how sick you are." And my world stopped because I knew whatever he was talking about, that's what I have, right? That's me. I don't know what that was. And being a typical alcoholic, of course, I didn't go up to him after the meeting and ask him what he meant. I drank vodka at that guy for 6 months. That guy ruined my drinking on the spot. This thing, what he said went through me, and I knew that the jig was up. I was like, what does he mean by that? What does that mean? Because it was just a knowing. I had a knowing about it that I couldn't put to words, but whatever that was, and whatever this blue book thing he was talking about, I need to kind of find somebody who can help me with that. Now, I wish I could tell you that I got sober right there and then, so I had to move down to where I'm at now near Princeton. And I'm blowing up every job and relationship I've had up until this point. And, I've never kept a job more than 3 years, never had a promotion, anything like that, because a little too much of me showed up in my daily work activity. And I remember going down to these meetings, and I'm sitting there going, my God, I really need to find something happen, because I'm either going to keep on drinking, I'm going to go on to the bitter end and die, or I'm going to put a gun in my mouth. And I didn't have the courage to do that. And I'm going to these meetings, and I'm starting to, hang out with these guys that are giving me prayer cards with third step prayer and things like that on it. I'd never experienced any of this stuff before. And I remember, starting to say the third step prayer every day and mean it. And then I'd kind of go out, and after a month I'd drink, and, I just was on this, spin cycle of relapse. And I remember going into this one meeting after having an absolute breakdown in the parking lot, crying and all this other stuff. And I go in there, and somebody reads this thing for something called, much like Glenn just mentioned about the Appalachian thing, but it was called the Jersey Shore Roundup. And I had gotten introduced to like Sandy Beach and Bob Darrell, and I'd heard a lot of CDs and things like that, and none of it ever resonated or hit me, because it was all a lot of stories and like alcoholic limericks and things. And I was just like, what? I mean, Bob Darrell, I follow Bob Darrell's talks because if my self-pity had a narrator, it would be Bob Darrell, because he had that perfect tone and delivery, and it was just me. I could just roll myself up in that blanket of self-pity, and I got that. So it was one of those things. I saw his name on it. I was like, ooh, I'm going to buy a ticket for that. And I was like, okay, cool. So this is now January 2014. I'm still drinking, and I had a slip. And at this time now, I'm married. I've got a house. I've got now an 18-month-old son that just thinks the moon and the sun revolve around me. And I'm absolutely hungover the next morning with almost alcohol poisoning. I call it a hangover. We call alcohol poisoning a hangover. It doesn't kill it. So I go out on this porch, and it's a January morning, 2014, about 90 days before my separation from alcohol. And he's following behind me. I had to smoke a cigarette, and I'm just mortified because I got to come in and wash all the stuff off me so I don't have to pick him up. And he's banging on the glass behind me, right? And I'm just like filled with dread, and I turn around and I don't see him. I get hit with a blinding light from the reflection, and I see myself in the reflection, and I was filled with absolute mortal fear on the spot. And guys, this is where I kind of go off the trail a little bit here, but I was removed from cigarettes, nicotine and opiates on the spot, right? And I was filled with this mortal fear, and I started this acute nicotine withdrawal process where I couldn't sleep at night. I'm going through toxic nicotine withdrawal. I'm hallucinating. I can't form sentences in my head, right? And something gave me the power to endure it. Now, this process happened for 6 months and a day, but 90 days later to the day, the same thing happened with alcohol, right? It was just kind of plucked up out of me. And I'd had, spiritual experiences like of the educational variety, that little gradual awakening thing. But this was like a bright light, like up out of me. So I had tried to quit smoking. I tried to do all this other stuff, and it was just pulled out of me on the spot. And It was not one of those peppermint patty, wind through your hair kind of feel good type of things. I mean, this felt horrible. And what I didn't realize was this would be the theme for any type of spiritual or emotional growth for the rest of my recovery to date. Like this, don't make the mistake of thinking that all spiritual experiences or awakenings will feel good. Because I suffered from that delusion for a long period of time, that everything that felt good was good and everything that felt bad was bad. And that was not my experience. And I started going to meetings, and what was weird is in that 90 days, I was fired from the job I hated. Now I've got no job. I got a wife, a kid, a house, no way to pay for it. And I'm stuck just sober and going to meetings 3 times a day. And I'm having the same experience that I drank on before, right? And finally, the time comes to go to this Jersey Shore Roundup thing. And I go into this thing, and my sponsor at the time was a guy who had 42 years, and he had read the book to me before, but more like a novel. And when I sat with him, it just made absolutely no sense. I was like, this is the worst book I have ever read in my life. Like, there's no plot line, there's no climax, and what I didn't know that was the big book was an old school text where they would tell you what they'd tell you, then they'd tell you what they told you, and then they tell you, and then they tell you what they told you, kind of a thing. And I was like, oh, okay. So it actually kind of is like meant to be followed like directions, so it would have an experience. And I was like, oh, all right. So that took me a long, I wish that didn't take me 18 years to learn, because I don't know how I was able to be graced with the ability to stick around long enough. Because I mean, I've seen a lot of people die from less, and it's a horrible thing to watch. But I remember going to meetings back then, and nobody would sit near me. I couldn't form sentences. I couldn't read anything. I just pass. And that's the very best I could do. So, I get that when we come in here, a lot of us are shot out. So, anytime I'm working with a new guy, I will literally just keep it to the book, and I'll explain what the basics are. I might not sit down and read something line by line with a new guy, things like that, because their wheels aren't turning. And my job here is to get him in touch with power as quickly as possible, right? I don't know how long that window is going to be open. But anyway, I end up back at this Jersey Shore Roundup thing, and it's got like all these amazing speakers that I now have learned so much from. It's Bob Darrell, and it's got Bob Bizantz and Katie Parker and Charlie Parker and Scott Lee and all these just guys. It was just like this all-star lineup that year, and an Al-Anon speaker named Larcene and Bob Bizantz's wife, and that literally I sat through absolutely every talk, and I started to have alcoholism revealed to me. And I started to hear about the phenomenon of craving. And, it's the only distinguishing characteristic that makes us alcoholic. And if you don't have it, you aren't one. But that's not your biggest problem. See, I got a mind that takes me back to a drink every time, despite knowing I have this allergy. This is this insanity that I suffer from, this inability to see the truth, right, when it comes to this relationship with alcohol. And I found out since it does not just apply to alcohol. So I'm sitting here and I'm going, wow, this spiritual malady I got, like restless, irritable, and discontented, I did not need anyone to explain to me. And I remember looking at my sponsor at the time, and I go, have you ever heard anybody talk about recovery and the steps this way? And he turned to me, 42 years sober, said the saddest thing I'd ever heard. He goes, no. He goes, but they are professional speakers. And I was like, what the hell's that got to do with anything? I was like, there's a reason there's a common problem, okay? And there's a reason we have to do these steps the way they're written, because I'm not going to bet a newcomer's life that my experience or opinion is going to work for him. That's why they call it the common problem. See, if we don't have a common problem, then the solution is debatable. And that's where I feel like this big disconnect was in a lot of the meetings that I was going from, because they're like, you don't have to do that. And it turns out I had to do that because I was the type of alcoholic they outline in these pages. And I was hanging out with people who didn't have to do this stuff, who I've written a lot of inventory on, but it is what it is. And I go through this process and I hear about step 2 and I was like, Catholic, skip it. I didn't even read We Agnostics. And then this little pepper pot gets up on the podium named Katie Parker. And she goes through this thing about step 3 and she parted the room. And I was like, oh my God, she's talking about me. And I was absolutely mortified, completely hair blown back. Ralph White got up there and did inventory. And, we had Bob Bizant's did 6 and 7, which blew my mind. 8 and 9 was Larry Thomas, and then we got into the big guys in 10, 11, and Charlie brought her home with 12. And I remember being there the next morning at the coffee maker, and Katie just happened to walk up and started talking to me like she'd known me for years. And I just looked just emaciated. I was just like blown away. She's like, "It's a lot, isn't it?" I was like, "Yes, I've never heard any of this stuff. And I've been in and around AA for 18 years, dying of thirst next to a freshwater lake. Had no idea any of this stuff existed. Had no idea what I actually suffered from." So I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I got Katie and Charlie's number, and I waited the appropriate amount of time, about 2 months, before I called her, asked for help, because when I left that roundup, my feet did not touch the ground. I was like, there was a high and an understanding, now self-knowledge, right? And I reached out to these guys and wrote them an email and just thanked them so much. And they started taking me through this process. And now the interesting thing about what Charlie and Katie did, and Charlie had sent me a CD of his step 1 talk that he did that like blew my mind. And he started getting me into Mark Houston and things like that, who was his sponsor and all that stuff. And when I got to chapter 2, We Agnostics, step 2, I was like, I skipped it because I was Catholic. He goes, maybe we ought to go back and give that a read. And basically the understanding was, hey, let's keep the gun on the table. Forget all the stuff you thought you knew about Catholic and all Catholicism and all this stuff, because I grew up in a home with violence, and I couldn't understand why I was wrong. And when I was 8 years old, being pushed up the wall by my neck and having no idea what I did, and just all that kind of stuff, that here, do as I say, not as I do kind of stuff. Take my advice, I'm not using it. So I had a big problem with the whole God thing. So it was basically like, hey, we're going to take some steps that you don't believe in to have an experience, and then you can develop your own conception. I was like, okay, cool, I can get with that. And he turns me over to Katie, and I had to make an appointment to meet with her. And she gave me an assignment for the entire week to, hey, you know what? I got to get you on the schedule, because she sponsors half the world. And I had to get on the schedule with her. And she goes, I want you to do something for me the next week. Every time you get upset, I want you to write it down and write what happened. And what I didn't know in her little Jedi mind was she was teaching me how to watch. And what was weird during that week, it was a 10-step practice. And it was one of the calmest weeks I had had. And my wife even commented on it. She's like, what's been going on? And I'm just like, I don't know, I'm just doing this thing. And every time I get upset, I pause and I stop and I look at what's going on. And I get into this conversation with her. She starts taking me through this stuff, and she starts turning statements into questions and putting my name in the book and kind of talking about, I've gone through, I'm powerless over alcohol and all that stuff and the malady. And then she basically sums up, am I convinced that my life run on self-will can hardly be a success? Do I see that my basic trouble, that I'm a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Do I see that I'm trying to manage the world and all its people won't bring me happiness and satisfaction? And she's starting to paint this picture away from alcohol, and she's starting to show me what my real problem is. Selfishness and self-centeredness. That's the root, like not vodka, right? So she started to outline the need for inventory, that the reason I was, yes, I've got this allergy. Yes, I've got this mental obsession and this spiritual malady, but that's because I'm living a self-reliant life, because I'm being driven by all these character defects and old ideas and resentments and fear that I had no idea I was being driven by. So she lines out the need for inventory, and she makes this sheet up. Sends me this sheet, which I give to all my sponsees, because I always had a hard time going from book to, so I took the book stuff out, put it like point by point what you're supposed to do and how I actually write it. So I started going through people, institutions, principles, what they did, and she lined me out on doing an extended third column. Not that it affects these areas of self, but how it affects these areas of self. That when so-and-so did such and such, did it hurt, threaten, or interfere with my self-esteem? How I see or feel about myself. I feel less than I feel more than, and my ego would finish the sentence. And I went through all of my resentments like that, and all of a sudden there became a narrative. right? When so-and-so did such and such, I saw a theme of what things, what my old ideas and belief systems were, and my programming as whatever stage character was writing in inventory. Because I've got a father stage character, I've got a brother stage character, I've got a husband stage character, I've got all these stage characters, and every single one of them have their own ideas, belief systems, programming, things like that they walk around the world with. And none of them know the other exists. So that I could have one thing happen that affects 4 stage characters, and I got 500 voices in my head. And we wonder why we blow our brains out. You know what I mean? It's just crazy, the stuff that happens in my alcoholic mind, which at this point has absolutely nothing to do with alcohol. It's the fact that I've got this, the biggest experience that I've had wasn't by going through the first 9 steps the first time. It was really having to go back from them through an active 10th step. Because this stuff that I start to see in my 4th column is how if I'm accurate and truthful in the first couple columns, the 4th column turns the first 2 columns into a lie. And the 4th columns show me what I'm watching for, since I've seen what my old ideas, belief systems, and things like. I know how Steve shows up on a daily basis when he goes out into the world as an employee, as a father, as a commuter to New York City at this point. You know, I've got a whole other stuff. I've got Little League dad now. You know what I mean? All these stage characters with all these things that happen. But these are the things I'm now going to be watching for in step 10. So I go through this process, you know, with Katie, and that's when they introduced me to my sponsor, Bill. So I met them when I was, going from the 3rd step to the 4th step. And God bless him, I never met him at this point. And he sat there, and I went home and I wrote my inventories out, the fear inventory, my sex inventory. And I did the hour in the 5th step, and 6 and 7 and all that stuff. And the great thing about my sponsor was he sat through that whole. I mean, I had about 100 things on my resentment inventory, and God bless him, he sat through all of it. And we had a few hour conversation, and he started lining me out on my amends list and our cards that we do, and how to start making approaches. And he got me started in 10, 11, and 12. And like I said, my biggest awakenings that I've had have been in step 10 and 11. It's like, these are the things that I'm watching for. And, when I started carrying this message and working with people, it's just been absolutely amazing. So kind of interesting. I'll tell you some amends stories real quick. I remember during this process that my son was pretty young, and my dad was kind of getting on me about having my son baptized. And he didn't get to give me any more spiritual advice. I'd kind of closed that door. And I remember this was the one thing on my inventory that I was like a dog with a bone, that I just wouldn't let him off the hook. When it came to this stuff, I couldn't get past it. And he calls me up one day and says this, and I lost my mind. Now, guys, this was sober. I wish I could tell you that, I'd since gotten to the point where I'd grown spiritually enough where I could just let that roll off my back. But I hung up on him, and I told him, you don't get to tell me what to do in that arena anymore. And I hung up on him, and I did not speak to him for a year. I punished him, because you can't talk to me like that. Okay. There's nothing he had that I wanted. And I did not ask for his counsel or advice. And I slammed that door on him. And and for the next year, I wouldn't pick up any phone calls. I wouldn't, see anybody, visit anybody when they came up. Now, what I didn't know was during that year where I was punishing him, that would be the last year that I would know my mother as my mother, because she started to get dementia-like symptoms and all this other stuff. And I robbed my son of the ability to get to know his Nana, and I robbed my mother of the ability to have a relationship with her son. And I had no idea, because I wouldn't take any calls. I wouldn't listen to any voicemail. I mean, I completely shut him out. Now, I'd had to write inventory on this again, and my sponsor, Bill, was having no luck getting me to the other side. So I had to make an appointment to go back and talk to Katie for one piece of inventory. And again, I had to make an appointment. And again, this one piece of inventory lasted 2.5 hours. And I lined out my dad. All right, this is what he did. And what I started Katie stopped me there, and she started actually asking me questions. She went on the offensive, and I'm sitting there like punch drunk trying to dodge all these questions because she's asking me, all right, what's the family like? What's the situation like in the family? How many kids in the family? Where are you at in that lineup? What was the money situation? Did your mother work or not? Where in the country did you grow up? And she's painting all around the resentment to kind of take, because I got tunnel vision. All I can see is you can't talk to me like that. And she starts to paint around the resentment. Now, what's interesting is this is how I learned how to hear inventory, by reading mine to somebody else and having the experience. That's the great thing about this process, because I can learn everything I need to know about the mechanics of the book. But if I don't do it, I can't teach it, or I'm just trying to share with somebody an experience I haven't had. And alcoholics are pretty quick about that kind of stuff, and they know BS when they hear it. So she starts going through these questions, and she's going, was your dad an alcoholic? No, blah, blah, blah. So what does your dad do better than you? And it stopped me cold in my tracks. Is he a better provider? He had 4 kids, you have 1. Well, yeah. What are some of the nice things that he did? Well, he taught me my profession. Basically, he taught me how to play golf. And that ultimately is what I do. He taught me how to drive. Got me out of a lot of legal scrapes and things like that. And all of a sudden, I'm feeling a 40-year resentment being pulled off me, because my entire problem isn't so much alcohol. It's how my mind perceives the world that I'm in and tells me how to react to it based on the scripts I have that I don't know I'm driven by. So this is why inventory is such a huge thing. And if you're new and you're scared of inventory, run to inventory. It is the greatest tool I have in my toolbox because it keeps me free of me. It gets me to the other side of any type of difficulty I'm having, because it's my perception, attitude, right? Which is an aeronautical term for angle of approach. My entire world is evolved around my perception of what's happening. And I love that you guys read the daily reflections, because I read 2 yesterday that blew my doors off and sums up my alcoholism, drunk and sober. And this one here yesterday, we abuse our own free will trying to work apart from God. And the very natural result is all the sickness, poverty, sin, trouble, and death that we find on the physical plane. We must never for a moment try to make plans or arrangements without reference to God, or suppose that we can be either happy or successful if we are seeking any other end than to do his will. Anybody relate to that? All of my trouble is of my own making. There it is. I mean, it's my perception. So for me to have an active 10th step is life-saving. And in some cases for sponsees, life-giving. And to show us how we have to work and live this way, because this isn't by really by choice, it's by necessity, right? And as I'm watching this process, right, I wake up on awakening. I take my plans for the day into my on awakening. I ask God to direct my thinking, that if he divorced from self-pity, all this stuff. And then I do my 10th step. I'm walking around saying, hey, watching for all those things I saw in my inventory. And then I get home in the evening review and I go, hey, Steve, how'd you do on that inventory today? Right? And, Katie was able to get me through this process to the other side of this. And I was able to make amends to my dad in a parking lot at the hospital, because my mom had an event where she ended up, it was back where I grew up, and I ended up driving over from New Jersey and being able to make amends to my dad. And it was really wild because I got to watch him heal. Whatever it was, that stuff that was between us was just gone. It just wasn't there. Now, he's done stuff since then that's absolutely driving me insane. But I don't have to go to that. I don't suffer from it. And as a result of it, how I feel about that relationship doesn't show up in our relationship. And I'm just like, yeah, that's just him being him, And I've learned to be okay with that now, even though it's like, hey, I can't save him, things like that. But, this long road of reconstruction, I have to take the lead because I'm the one with the program, right? And I'm the one that my experience has shown me will put booze back in my system if I don't follow this process, and, the 11th step has been incredible because, as we go through this process in time, things can get a little bit stale. So I've talked at meetings where I've had people in the box kind of going like this, where I've been sharing stuff and they say, hey, talk to me after the meeting. I got something for you. And I had a guy give me a step 6 and 7 exercise that blew my doors off. And it was a completely deep level of how I ever saw or experienced step 6 and 7, where basically it was all my character defects. I had to write out the definitions of them by hand, write out the 7-step prayer by hand, and put all of my defects in it, reading the 7-step prayer with each one out loud 3 times a day for a month. And I was like, all right, there's some virtue in taking direction. So I tried it because I wanted to, see this stuff, because I was scared to death I was going to, skimp on some of this stuff and go back to what I was doing before. So I was like, all right, cool. Now, what was weird is I remember going out, leaving work, having a break at work and going out to my car because I had to say this stuff out loud. Every good spiritual exercise that you're doing out loud starts like this. See if anybody's watching. And then I go and I read this stuff. And what's interesting, I'm just going through the process. And now all of a sudden, a couple of weeks into this, I start, when the defect is aroused, all of a sudden the definition starts to go across my head and pulls me right out of the situation. And I'm going, oh, that's self-pity. Oh, and I had an unbelievably smooth month. But it's just stuff like that, and just fellow seekers and being on this road and in this path. And I've done stuff. I've learned a lot about, attachments and programming from Anthony DeMello in this little book called The Way to Love. Completely changed my world to do things along with and not instead of, because sometimes I got to kind of mix things up. I can mail the evening review in a little bit. I can go through the motions in On Awakening because I turn back to self-reliance kind of stuff and I start to fall asleep again sober. And I've got to constantly keep evolving and changing because I can't stay fit on the workout I had a month ago, kind of thing. I've got to keep current in this process. And, the guys that I work with help me with that. We started a circle and triangle check-in on Zoom right before the pandemic hit. And it actually carried us through the pandemic. So wherever any of us are at, we can kind of check in. This is how many meetings I got. This is where I'm at with my disciplines. Who am I helping? And then every once in a while, we'll throw a topic in there to kind of change our perception about things, because everything's all about that perspective, my mind, my attitude, which creates my reality. That's the thing that one of the biggest things I learned as a result of this process in Alcoholics Anonymous is once I put the drink down and I finally got so sick of self that I came to the second surrender of self in step 3 with Katie, right? That, she took a great thing that sticks out with her in that she goes, Steve, it's easier to get a drunk to quit drinking than it is to get them to quit playing God in their life. Boom. Man, I still am guilty of that, right? So I have to see those areas, and they all have to do around the areas where I get resentment, fear, or where I show up in my sex conduct relationships and things like that, or with my son, or anything that I care about that somehow, some way, I think I can get a better deal than God's going to get me. And inevitably, I end up blowing my life or that situation up again. This whole process of this pandemic has literally broadened and deepened my disciplines, because it forced me when I'm an outdoor cat. I travel a lot. I do things outside. I teach golf for a living, that kind of stuff. And then I went from, doing that to becoming a homeschool dad for a 7-year-old. Now, about 2 weeks into this process, I start writing resentment inventory on a 7-year-old for acting like a 7-year-old. And I got to start calling my sponsor, and I'm not doing okay. And I'm sitting here thinking I'm doing the deal. And it forced me to look back of, hey, what am I not doing? And that's where the step 6 and 7 exercise came, and this whole Zoom thing evolved, and it's allowed me to reach out and connect with people like you, and you guys can share your experience with me so I can kind of help fill my toolbox. It'll help me be a more effective husband and father and sponsor and just overall better human being. So for that, I thank you, Glenn. Thanks for having me, and I will turn our meeting back over to you.